Hey guys, Pastor Brody here. Just wanted to let you know that our leadership team has been praying that God would use this sermon to help build you up into the image of His Son, Jesus Christ, and that He would do that in conjunction with the local church. So if you're here in the area, why don't you stop by this weekend? Why don't you see us in person and really get connected to what God is doing here? If you're not here, we pray the same for where you are. Get connected to your local church. We think that's one of the best things that you can do. Thanks so much for watching this, and I pray that it blesses you. You can go ahead and open up to Judges chapter 17. We are closing out our series in the book of Judges today. We have already looked at all the judges. All the judges that have been mentioned, we have already looked at, and yet there are still 5 chapters in the book of Judges. These last 5 chapters of Judges, they're a departure from the earlier narrative. The earlier passages, they give us a bird's eye view of kind of what's going on, and they do that through the focal point of a judge. We saw over and over again that Israel, the people of God, they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. These next chapters, they give us a ground level, a detailed view of life during the time of the judges in Israel. Now, next week, we're going to be starting a new series in the book of Ruth. And I think that's just so poignant to come right after the book of Judges. Judges is about a faithless people and a faithless world that's loved by a faithful God. And the book of Ruth is set in the time of Judges and shows us the faithful life of the lineage of King David. So I can't wait to jump into that with you guys next week. But if you remember, from the beginning of the book of Judges, we had this double introduction. The first introduction, it covered the geopolitical scene in the land during the time of the judges. The second introduction, it covered the spiritual scene and the people of Israel. And here at the end of the book, we get 2 episodes that are kind of like a double appendix, a double ending to the book of Judges. The first episode, 17 and 18, it covers the spiritual decay of God's people. The second and final episode, chapters 19 to 21, it covers the geopolitical decay of God's people. And here's the interesting thing. These final chapters in the book of Judges, they barely mention the Lord's name. They're showing us what life is like when Israel was left to their own resources. When they're showing us what it truly means for people to do right in their own eyes. That's the refrain at the end of the book. That Israel had no king, and the people did what was right in their own eyes. Faithless people in a faithless world. The situation of humanity is so bleak without God that these passages are almost never preached on, and they're hardly ever studied. They're grim, they're disgusting, they're brutish and terrible. And for our time today, we're going to focus in on that first episode, the spiritual scene, the spiritual decay of the book. And we're going to see, this is what we're going to see, that we need a true king. That's what we need. That's the big idea, the main idea for today. We need a true king. Everyone doing what is right in their own eyes is the same as doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. That's the connection in the book of Judges. Those first chapters, the bird's eye view, everyone was doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. And now these last 5 chapters, everyone was doing right in their own eyes. Those are the same thing. The end of the book of Judges is a gruesome history. There is no judge, there's no king, there's no leader, only people doing what is right in their own eyes, and an abundance of horrifying violence culminating in a civil war that almost eradicates an entire tribe of Israel. But that refrain that we're left with, that there is no king in Israel, that's the one thing that we need to cling to and that we need to run toward. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read from and summarize this first episode, chapters 17 and 18 in Judges. There's basically 3 different scenes in these 2 chapters, 3 different movements, and all of which point out the spiritual decay and the spiritual death of God's people. And after looking through the lens of our text today, I'm going to draw out 4 implications for us. 4 implications of the need for a king, a true king in our lives today. So let me just start by reading the first 6 verses in Judges chapter 17. Verse 1, there was a man of the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse and also spoke it in my ears, behold, the silver is with me, I took it. And his mother said, blessed be my son by the Lord. And he restored the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. And his mother said, I dedicate the silver to the Lord from my hand for my son, to make a carved image and a metal image. Now therefore I will restore it to you. So when he restored the money to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith, who made it into a carved image and a metal image. And it was in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household gods, and ordained one of his sons who became his priest. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. All right, this is scene 1. We meet a few different people, a few different characters. Micah, his mother, and Micah's son. Micah has stolen from his mom. Great son that he is, but he feels bad, probably because his mom has called down a curse on whoever stole from her, so he fesses up and he gives it back. And his mom, the great mom that she is happy. And she dedicates over 20%, almost 20% of her wealth to the Lord. That's awesome, right? I mean, how many of us are giving 20%, at 20% giving capacity? That's a large amount. But she dedicated it in order to make a carved image, an idol. So they make an idol, and they build a shrine. And they to put the cherry on top, they make one of Micah's sons a priest. You know, the thing that only Levites were supposed to do. They decide that, we have the shrine now, so I guess we need a priest to minister to us from the shrine. And they look around and they probably see a donkey and a couple horses and a son. And they're like, I guess we'll go with the son to be the priest. And then the author of Judges, probably rolling his eyes so hard that they almost fall out, he writes, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. In sum, between the two of them, both Micah and his mother, they've broken at least half of the 10 Commandments in only 5 verses. They have worshipped another god besides God. They have made an idol. They have used God's name wrongly. Micah has stolen and thereby failing to honor his mother. And neither mother nor son, or even the grandson, none of them seem to recognize or understand the incongruencies or the ironies of what is happening. This is a stark depiction of the evil that is going on in the time of Judges. At the beginning of Judges, we saw the nation, it struggled with this temptation to worship foreign gods. But here at the end of the book, there is no such struggle. They're willfully doing it. They're cheerfully manufacturing their own gods. They're blurring the lines between false deities and the true God. Faithless people in a faithless world. And then we get to scene 2, verse 7. Now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. And the man departed from the town of Bethlehem in Judah to sojourn where he could find a place. And as he journeyed, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. And Micah said to him, Where do you come from? And he said to him, I'm a Levite of Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to sojourn where I may find a place. And Micah said to him, Stay with me, and be to me a father and a priest, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, and a suit of clothes, and your living. And the Levite went in. And the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. And Micah ordained the Levite, and the young man became his priest and was in the house of Micah. And then Micah said, Now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as a priest. All right, this is scene 2, right? The journeyman of a Levite is wandering around all of creation. He's not doing what he was meant to do in the tabernacle. He's not working for the Lord in the way that he was supposed to. But I can imagine he's loading up his van with snacks. He's making sure that he has everything that he needs for a fun adventure. He's forsaking his call in life for the allure of the hills and to go live in a van down by the river. That's what this Levite's doing. But he gets to Micah's house. And Micah's asking, where are you from? Who are you? You don't look like you're from here. You don't sound like you're from here. And so he tells Micah who he is. And Micah's like, oh, this is wonderful. I have a Levite here. This is better than my son being a priest. I have a Levite now that I can make my personal priest. I have a shrine, and I built it, and I need you to work here, to attend to it, to bring down God's blessings and favors for me. And so he offers him some of his mom's money again, and some cool new shirts, and the Levite goes for it. He's like, this is great. I'll do this. And the whole goal of Micah and his mom's shrine, because it's her money, it's her shrine too, the whole goal is found in verse 13, when Micah said, now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as priest. The purpose of Micah's religious efforts was to get access to God so that he can get what he wants. That's one of the main differences between true faith and false religion. True faith says, God, here's my heart. I trust you. Come what may, I am yours. False religion, it says, God, here's what I want. You serve me. Come only prosperity. I am mine. Micah, he was attempting to make a God in his image so that he would be the one who reaped all the benefits of the divine. But God is not made in man's image. Man is made in God's image. That's how far off they are here. Faithless people in a faithless world. And now we get to the last scene, scene 3. Judges chapter 18. Let me read verses 1 through 6. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the people of Dan was seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in. For until then, no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. So the people of Dan sent 5 able men from the whole number of their tribe, from Zorah and from Eshtalah, to spy out the land and to explore it. And they said to them, go and explore the land. And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. When they were by the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of a young Levite. And they turned aside and said to him, who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What is your business here? And he said to them, this is how Micah dealt with me. He has hired me, and I have become his priest. And they said to him, inquire of God, please, that we may know whether the journey on which we are setting out will succeed. And the priest said to them, go in peace. The journey on which you go is under the eye of the Lord. So the author starts these verses again. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and then just kind of leaves it hanging. He doesn't finish the refrain because we're supposed to repeat it ourselves now. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes, setting us up to see what everyone is doing right in their own eyes in this text. And we're introduced to this new character, the people of Dan, the tribe of Dan. Have you noticed so far in what we've read in this short story that Micah is the only character who's explicitly named? The mom, the son, the Levite, and now the people of Dan, but no specific names. One author pointed out that this absence of named characters, it reflects the depersonalization and the chaos of the society that is the consequence of faithless leadership. Basically, this is a single story, but it reflects a larger picture. This is the author that's painting the story in broad brushstrokes, because this type of thing was happening all over Israel. This is not just a one-time event, a one-time thing. This wasn't just a random occurrence, but this type of thing, people doing what was right in their own eyes, was happening all across Israel. But we meet the people of Dan, and they're wandering around because they never completed the task. If you go back to the beginning of the book, You see all these tribes who were supposed to go take the land, supposed to go take what was theirs, the promised land that God had given them, but they never did. So they're out searching for a different place because the promised land was too hard for them to take. They didn't trust God. They didn't have faith. And they hear someone who's out of place, this Levite. And so they question him to find out that he is a personal priest of this one man, Micah, in his home to this shrine. And instead of correcting, instead of pointing out the sin in their life of the false worship that's taking place, they're like, why don't you bless us too? Since you're a priest, why don't you tell us if God's going to bless us in this endeavor? And the Levite, who's obviously just in the business of telling people what they want to hear, says, yeah, of course, the Lord is with you. The Lord's eye is on you, which is such a truism, right? Of course the Lord's eye is on them. But he says it in such a way that they're taking that as a blessing. And instead of reading this next little bit of what happens, let me just summarize this next, and then we'll pick back up in verse 21. So in this next section, the people of Dan, they find a nice piece of land that's easy for them to take with their numbers, with 600 men. Instead of trusting God to give them the promised land that they were promised in the beginning, they trust a pagan priest and their own strength to secure a place for themselves. On their way to secure the land, after those 5 people had come to Micah's house, they all see Micah's house and the shrine, and so they decide to take the shrine with them. Because, yeah, the shrine's good with one house, but it's even better with the whole people. So they take it with them. But the Levite, he steps in and he's like, what are you guys doing? You can't do this. But the 600 men of Dan just say, shut up. Isn't it better for you to be a priest over a whole tribe than it is for you to be a priest over one family? And so the Levite kind of weighs his options, and he's like, yeah, that seems better to me to have more people and more money and more prestige and more success. And he gladly went with the people. And then we pick up verse 21. So they turned, the people of Dan, they turned and departed, putting the little ones and the livestock and the goods in front of them. And when they had gone a distance from the home of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house were called out, and they overtook the people of Dan. And they shouted to the people of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, what is the matter with you, that you come with such a company? And he said, you take my gods that I made and the priest and go away, and what have I left? How then do you ask me, what is the matter with you? And the people of Dan said to him, do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows fall upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household. Then the people of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his home. Micah was devastated. All he had worked for was taken from him. He had built his life on this altar, and a bigger bully took it from him. He built up this religious life. He added an idol, an ephod, and even a priest, and he looked at this thing for blessing. He had trusted in these things, and now they were just gone, taken from him. He tried to go and fight to bring it back, but he wasn't strong enough. And ultimately, Micah's greatest blessing was that he discovered the emptiness of his self-made religion before he died. He still had time to search for a true king. But in those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Judges, the book of Judges, is meant to help us see that a king is coming. Yes, a king for the nation of Israel, but also a greater king, King Jesus. And since the book ends with this gaping hole of leadership and the call for someone to come and fill it, let's take a look at the implications of what a true king would bring. I have 4 implications that I want to draw out from the text today about the future king, the true king. Here's the first one. A true king will show us our sin. What are some of the sins that a true king will show us? I mean, just from these verses today, we could pick out at least half of the 10 Commandments that he could reveal, that he could show us, that he could point out in our life. But let me drive down on one particular sin from the text that has far-reaching implications for us today. That's the sin of false religion. A true king would show this to his people, would reveal this to them. He would not only point out to them the wrong, but he would point them back to true worship. A true king would lead in worship. But what is the false religion from the text here in Judges 17 and 18? It's something that we would call syncretism. In this passage, what is primarily condemned is not idolatry in the raw, worshiping other gods, but the syncretism in particular. Not the worship of other gods, but the worship of Yahweh, Israel's God, in the wrong way. Syncretism is just a fancy way of saying a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's Micah and his mother saying, well, we like this aspect of Canaanite religion. We like that they have little shrines and gods in their house, and we want to take that. But we still kind of like the way that we call our God Yahweh. So we'll take that, and we'll just mix them together, and we'll worship in the way that we choose. Instead of being made in God's image, it's God being made in the image of man. It's idol worship. It's taking a good thing, silver, and making it into a God thing. Good things are never meant to take the place of God. And a true king would show that to his people. How does this play out for us today? What are some ways that we see syncretism at play in our culture? Let me outline maybe one of the most popular forms of syncretism in our world today. And here's what I think a normal American would believe today. If you just walked up to a random American on the street, asked what they believe, they would probably say something like this. They would say, well, I believe that a God exists who created and ordered the world and watches over human life on earth. A God. They would probably say that God wants people to be good and nice and fair to each other, as taught in the Bible and most other world religions. Morality. There's some sense of morality. They would probably say the central goal in life is to be happy and to feel good about oneself. They would probably say that God does not need to be particularly involved in one's life, except when God needs to resolve a problem, to save you from something. And they'd probably also say that good people, they go to heaven when they die. Now, some of these are just blatantly unchristian and unbiblical. It's not what the Bible teaches us about our faith. But some of these are sneakily half-truths. That's syncretism. It takes some truth, some from the world, some of this flavor, some of this spice, and the melting pot of our culture today, this is what comes out. We are formed, I think, more than we'd like to admit by the world around us. That some of those things that I said, you're like, well, yeah. But maybe you see through the veil here of what scholars would call moralistic deism. That's what I just defined to you guys. Maybe you've gone to church your whole life. Maybe your grandpa was a pastor and you know the stories of the Bible from a young age. You could read them back to me like the back of your hand. Well, another form of syncretism that syncretism takes is something called sacramentalism. Believing that some degree of conformity to religious externals will surely draw down divine approval. That's what Micah was doing, right? If I could just look like I'm this religious man, then God will surely bless me. He's not going to bring hardship on me. He's not going to let a tribe come and take everything that I own. He wouldn't do that. You begin to think that you can switch God's grace on automatically for yourself. That you can call down magic from heaven whenever you want. With some, it's a superstitious regard for something like infant baptism, thinking that if the child is baptized, then they are covered, that they are protected, that everything is going to be okay. Others, they think that if they pay back enough to God, that if they give enough, that if I give a little more than I gave last week, then God will surely look down on me and bless me. Others think that walking down the aisle on the 5th stanza of the hymn and a call of invitation is the same thing as entering into the kingdom of God. You prayed a prayer, you bowed your head, you closed your eyes, you raised your hand. If your faith is in your work to earn salvation, then it's a false religion. It's crazy. It's you thinking that you are God, that you can dictate to God what he does. It doesn't differ from Micah's false religion in principle, but only in form. It may look different, but at its roots, it's the same thing. And yet, for that reason, it may remain invisible to us today. And that's why it's a danger. Other than just leading us away from God, there's consequences to this type of sin. The sin of false religion. Sin of false religion tends to make us hollow. Sure, you're externally proper, or even nice, People would describe you as a nice person. But underneath, you are scraping and clutching and trying to keep power, trying to keep control over your life. You're doing everything you can in order to get ahead and to just stay in God's good blessing. You're trying to get ahead of your competition, sure, but even ahead of those closest to you. Sin does a great job of making you into Two-Face, into Harvey Dent, if anyone knows anything about Batman. The upstanding citizen turned villain. You show the side that you want to those closest to you, but underneath the surface, it's right there all the time. Sin is destroying us. And a true king would show that. But here's the second implication of a true king. A true king will redeem us. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. A true king would never allow the people to continue in their sin, to continue doing what was right in their own eyes, to do evil in the eyes of the Lord. A true king would win us back from the powers of sin and darkness. His light would shine on his people like the warm light of a sun. His presence would bring healing and restoration. A true king would come riding on a donkey. A true king would cleanse the temple. A true king would turn over the tables. He wouldn't let a house of worship and prayer to become a den of robbers. He would do everything he could to win us back, even if it meant him losing everything. A true king would lose his life for the sake of his people. He would lead the charge. He would take down the enemy. He would be nailed to the cross. He would be humiliated and shamed in order that he might take on our shame and guilt. The whole book of Judges has been showing us the need for a king. And the people, they end up wanting one. They want one so badly that they force God's hand, and God gives them what they want. He gives them a king to rule over them, but not the true king. Not yet. Not the one who has their best interest in mind. Not the one willing to do everything to save his people. But one day, a king would be born in Bethlehem, a king from David's line, a king of miraculous birth, a king who was God himself, the true king, King Jesus. And he is the one who redeems his people. That's the second implication of a true king. Here's the third. A true king will adopt us. Listen, having a king that will go down into the muck and mire to win back his people is an amazing thing. But you want to know something about the true king that's just unfathomable, that we can't really wrap our minds around? The true king will save his people, and then not only does he set them free, but he brings them into his own family. Think about that for a second. They become his children, princes, princesses, heirs. They become brothers and sisters with Christ. You would think that a benevolent king would save his people by riding into battle, by leading the charge, by defeating the enemy, but you would never expect him to turn around after victory and bring the whole kingdom into his royal line. But the true king does. One of my favorite books that I try to reread yearly is Knowing God by J.I. Packer. And I think he puts this better than I ever could, so let me just read what he writes. You sum up the whole New Testament, you sum up the whole of the New Testament religion if you describe it as the knowledge of God as one's holy Father. If you want to judge how well a person understands Christianity, find out how much he makes of the thought of God, of being God's child and having God as his Father. If this is not the thought that prompts and controls his worship and prayers and his whole outlook on life, it means that he does not understand Christianity very well at all. And he goes on. For everything that Christ taught, everything that makes the New Testament new and better than the Old, everything that is distinctively Christian as opposed to merely Jewish, is summed up in the knowledge of the fatherhood of God. Father is the Christian name for God. Our understanding of Christianity cannot be better than our grasp of adoption. What other religion looks at God in this way? Not only does the true King show us our sin, not only does he redeem us back, win us back from that sin, but then the true King adopts us as children of his own. That's crazy. Other religions might say that there is something like sin, that there is something that you can do that's against God, some do's and don'ts that you need to follow. But when you mess up, it's on you to get back into the right. It's on you to pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. It's on you to do 10 Hail Marys. It's on you to do a good deed for another person. You need to be better. You need to try a little harder. And then, once you're good enough, you'll go to heaven. But that's not Christianity. Christianity says that you are dead in your sins and trespasses, that only God can make you alive again. And when he does, he goes farther than you'd ever imagine. The true King makes you a son and daughter. The true King makes you a co-heir with Christ. You get to inherit the kingdom. That's crazy. That's the third implication, though. Here's the fourth. A true King will lead us. Throughout the whole book, they've been looking for a leader. The people of Dan, they're just leading themselves. They're not following God. They're doing what is right in their own eyes. They're saying, well, that hill country up there in Ephraim looks good. Let's go try to take some of that land because the promised land is too hard. But we have a true King who will lead us. And you know what King Jesus said to his followers? The charge that he gave them, the thing that he wanted them to continue once he left bodily from this earth? Here's what he said. Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. What Jesus is saying that his church does, that his followers do, it flows out of this call to make disciples. So someone who we would say is a worshiper of Jesus, a witness to Jesus, a steward of Jesus' gifts, and a servant to Jesus who wants others to do the same. Someone who is going in order to make disciples. Someone who is baptizing in order to make disciples. Someone who is teaching in order to make disciples. What the true King Jesus is making clear to us is that making disciples is not just a ministry of the church, it is the ministry of the church. Making disciples, this great commission, is why we as a church exist. And therefore, I think the mission of every biblically healthy church should be a faithful restatement of this great commission, with rich implications for their particular place and people that God has called them to. And our mission is to build you up and send you out. That's why we exist. We exist to build you up into the image of Christ and send you out into the world as agents of change. That's our faithful restatement of this great commission. And why do we say it like that? Why do we say build you up and send you out? Why is that even our focus? I learned recently that in Haywood County, which is the county where we live, so if you're visiting today, you're in Haywood County. Haywood County has no water that flows into it. All of the water in Haywood County is source water, and it flows out of the county. Now, I know that it was the people of the state of North Carolina who drew the boundaries, who came up with the measurements of what the county would be and what it would look like. But I do know that God's in charge. He's in control. If our county is one that sends out the best of what it has, gives it to others freely, why wouldn't we want to be a church that does the same? McLean and Caleb, they have such bright futures. And you'd be tempted as a church to try to hold on to them. to try to just keep them. But what God has called us to do, we will see it through. We want you to be doing what you love for the glory of God, somewhere strategic for the mission of God, even if that's not here. And even the place where we live, Haywood County, does that. And here's the reason why that's so important. Because God has no grandchildren. We're only one generation away from the gospel failing to be passed on. Always. It's a high call to steward. And we must steward it well. So here's my question to you. Do you want to be a part of that? Do you want to be a part of something that's bigger than just you? That's bigger than just a little shrine that you might have in your own house? Do you want your church to be about something that's bigger than just your church? Here's my call. Join us, and let's do it together. Let's be so countercultural, so joyous in our giving away, of our sending out, of our building people up, not in order to just keep them here, but build them up in order to see them leave. Let's be so countercultural that we give more than we receive, so that when others look in, they have to just stop and marvel at how great God is. That they don't even see us as a church at all, but they see God, the God of the Bible, the God who came to the earth to seek and to save the lost, who died on a cross, who gave his life for others so that others may live, and then adopted them into his family. So that when they see what we do, they see that God and are so compelled and are so intrigued that they want to be a part of that. What a statement of God's worth if we could do that.